Welcome to Kentucky Tonight. This evening we'll discuss cloning. Given recent scientific advances, should Americans draw a line on cloning? Our guest tonight, Keith Jones, Assistant Professor of Medicine and Biochemistry at the University of Louisville. Panos Zavos, Professor of Reproductive Physiology and Andrology at the University of Kentucky and Chief Andrologist at the Andrology Institute of America. Ben Mitchell, Assistant Professor of Christian Ethics at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Scott Williamson, Assistant Professor of Theological Ethics at Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Our host is Bill Goodman.
Good evening. Just a few days ago, reports told us of another scientific breakthrough using a technique similar to the one that Scottish scientists used to clone Dolly the sheep. Although different, it once again raised questions concerning cloning, questions our panel will explore tonight. But first, Kentucky Tonight's Renee Shaw tells us about one other cloning discovery involving mice.
Last summer, scientists made further advances in the area of cloning. Researchers from Hawaii successfully cloned multiple generations of mice, a feat once thought impossible.
It's an important breakthrough because it's the first time that mice have been cloned from adult cells, or indeed perhaps any cells. And in fact, I think it may be true to say that it's the first report of cloning clones of any vertebrate species.
Researchers say the technique used to clone mice is more advanced and has a higher success rate than what was used to produce Dolly the sheep and the recently born twin calves. Scientists say this new discovery in cloning could help treat diseases like cancer, AIDS, diabetes, and multiple sclerosis. They say the technology can also be applied to cloning other mammals, which could be used for medicinal purposes.
Animals who have been carefully generated so that their organs can be used in human transplant surgery, which might sound to you somewhat shocking, but of course anyone who is in need of, for example, a new kidney, who is waiting, undergoing constant or repeated dialysis for a matching donor to be found, would, I think, be very, very, very eager that anything that can be done to help them should be facilitated.
Scientists say the new method of cloning mice is not a means to clone humans, but the controversy surrounding cloning has many wondering just how far science will go. I'm Renee Shaw for Kentucky Tonight.
Good evening to our panel. Thanks very much for joining me tonight, and good evening to everyone joining us from across the state of Kentucky. Tonight, before we get into the heart of our discussion on cloning, let's do just a little bit of housework here as far as definitions and clarifications of titles. I think it might help all of us understand each other a little bit better. Dr. Zavos, first of all, Professor of Physiology and Andrology. Tell our audience, tell me if you will please, what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about the discussion of andrology?
Andrology, as the term implies, is a Greek term that means the man, andros. And it's the opposite of gynecology, which obviously is the study of women. And so andrology is a new term that evolved that tends to concentrate on medical and primarily infertility efforts directed towards the treatment of infertility and the study of male reproduction.
Mm-hmm. And Professor Jones from the University of Louisville, Professor of Medicine and Biochemistry, and also some work done similar to the report that we just saw, at least the same animal, we'll say, mice at the University of Louisville. Tell us a little bit about what you do there.
Right, we do work with gene targeting, making transgenic mice. We're basically using techniques similar to cloning to do genetic manipulation in the mice, so we can take out certain gene functions, add in certain gene functions.
And to both of you, if you will comment, how close are your everyday jobs when you go to work every morning to what we're talking about tonight on the panel, which is cloning? Doctor?
Well, obviously the cloning aspect used to be very fictional. Today it's a realistic view of treatment of various deficiencies, as the gentleman from Hawaii referred to, creating organs for transplant, treatment of infertility, whether it would be male or female infertility. The idea of cloning something or somebody is beyond comprehension, but is becoming to be a reality in the scientific world.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Jones, same question, please.
Well, basically, when we do these manipulations in the mice, we're essentially doing them in cells, and we then use the cells to generate mice, and that essentially is cloning. So maybe I should just take a second and define cloning.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, cloning is a process that one can use to generate from one organism a genetic duplicate. Okay, now that sounds frightening, but in essence, it's the same thing that happens in twinning. So basically, a clone is no more than a twin.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important thing I think people ought to take into consideration.
We'll remember that as we go through our discussion. And our two ethicists tonight, Ben Mitchell and Scott Williamson, joining us on the panel. Professor Reverend Mitchell, let me ask you first of all where we get close to the line when we talk about religion and science, and how your duties and job and your teaching and your research and ethicism really brings you to that point of deciding where religion begins and ends, and where science plays into all of that.
Well, I think that it's clear that science has to do with the development of new technologies or understanding the human biological processes or animal processes. But the realm of ethics and theology has to do with the moral question. Just because we can do something scientifically, biologically, should we do it? So the theological question, the moral question, is the question about whether it's right or wrong, appropriate, inappropriate, and under what conditions it might be appropriate or inappropriate to do something. So it raises questions about the ought question.
Mm-hmm. Reverend Williamson, similar question to you. How close do we get to talking about cloning when we're talking about where religion leaves off and science begins? Where does the moral implications of this discussion that we've had more of since we had Dolly the sheep a couple of years ago, or really actually last year? What are your feelings in this area?
I think that religion provides a framework, a way of looking at technology, so that we're not looking at technology in a vacuum. We're looking with certain kinds of beliefs, certain kinds of assumptions. And I think that on the basis of our religious convictions, we begin to assess different technologies in different ways, or we raise some questions about possible uses or how that technology is developed. So I don't see sort of technical questions or questions about technology being separate from sort of religious foundations. I don't see that line between the two. I think it's more of a blur than a line, but religion informs how we think about that technology.
Reverend Mitchell, is there a line there, do you think?
With respect to cloning technology? Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there are some really important questions to ask. First of all, I think that with respect to animal cloning, that there are no more ethical issues raised in animal cloning than other kinds of experimentations on animals. And I think that as long as we can assure that there are no unnecessary harms to the animals, that we can use animal cloning appropriately. When we begin to move that line over to human cloning, I think there are other questions that we need to ask. For instance, why is it that we would want to clone a human being in the first place? Is it to replace a child that's been lost in a tragic accident or was lost in childbirth? Well, obviously, you can't replace a child, so that's a questionable reason for wanting cloning. Is it to provide organs for yourself or for someone else by raising a surrogate or a child who would become an adult whose organs could then be transplanted to you or to someone else? Again, that raises questions about that person's autonomy, about their consent, and about whether we should use people as means to an end, use other people as means to an end. I think the most difficult question with respect to the use of human cloning technology is the question, should we use this to help couples who can't conceive any other